Good evening, everybody. Welcome at this special TEFAF lecture this year of Studium Generale. Especially for the TEFAF, this is also an international lecture, but I'm wondering, is anybody here that doesn't speak Dutch? Yes, one. You're very welcome. And is there anybody here, is there TEFAF audience here? Did anybody visit yet or is going to visit? Can I see hands? Oh, that's a lot. That's very nice. Well, I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to miss it this year, but it's also always a very nice experience. And the nice thing, because of this lecture, that there's also a lot of silverware there. And that's something we don't know much about. At least I don't know much about, don't learn much about, because in standard topics when it comes to Dutch paintings in the Dutch Republic, so the 17th, 18th century, before the 18th century, is of course that we talk about all the painters that we know and the blooming of the Dutch art market at that time. So it was very nice when I looked for somebody to talk about this Dutch Republic revival, or how do you call it, development of art and the dealing in art, and of course looking at all the beautiful pictures of painters like Rembrandt, that I stumbled on Stijn Bussels, and I have to take off my glasses. He's head of the Department of Art History and professor of art history, especially before 1800 Leiden University. And he came up with a topic that I would not think of immediately thinking of and looking for a speaker on this topic of 17th century Dutch art, expensive and avant-garde jokes of silver from the Dutch Republic, but in association with indeed the TEFAF, which is much more than paintings and also about silverware. I thought this is actually a very nice topic, and also another way to look at developments in art at that period. So I'm very happy that you said yes to this TEFAF lecture 2025. Stijn Bussels will talk about 45 minutes to an hour, after which, of course, there's time for questions. If somebody who has trouble with following the English, it is possible that Stijn also explains little parts in Dutch. So if you really think, oh, what did he now actually say? I mean, not every sentence, but if there's a part that you think, hey, I don't think I get this in English really, please raise your hand so he can explain a little bit in Dutch if you want to. So it's a nice possibility, right? Since there's so many Dutch. But anyway, please welcome Stijn Bussels.
Thank you so much for this introduction, and also thanks for the invitation. I gladly accepted, of course, because I really wanted to tell about the 17th century, but I also accepted because I really wanted to be back in Maastricht. It's ages ago. My grandfather was an historian. He worked in the city archive of Hasselt, which is then Belgian Limburg. And he always took me to his favorite city, Maastricht. So this is ages ago I was here, but I certainly also accepted because I wanted to go back here and see if it was still the same. And actually it still looks a bit the same than, let's say, 30 years ago. So I'm very happy to be here. And let's say that this talk is also for my grandfather. Indeed, we're going to talk about one of the most expensive things you could own in the 17th century, a ewer, a cup, or other silverware made by famous silversmiths. But we never ever truly understand how it functions. It's still a mystery to art historians, historians of the decorative arts, of how we can interpret it. So that's a bit what we're going to explore today. as I will tell, I do think that humor, although very expensive stuff, humor is also one of the ways to better understand the impact of how it functioned. It's very hard to understand in the 17th century how an object of art, even painting, prints, drawing, what impact they had on people, because strangely enough, in the 17th century, people very, very seldom write about what they feel when they're in front of a painting, when they're in front of, I don't know, what kind of work of art. There are no what we call ego documents, so the me form, I experience this and that, in the 17th century that deal with art. So what we have to do is try to relate it to a more broad visual culture, try to relate it to their concepts of what effect, what impact it could have. Very often it's religious, so the same way as they deal with God, the overwhelming effect of God can be also an overwhelming effect of a big, big painting, for example. And what I'm going to try to do is trying to reconstruct how humor works in the 17th century. And we always have to be very careful doing that, because sometimes what we think is very laughable is not laughable in the 17th century. It's totally different. So that kind of reconstruction I will try to do. So I will read it, the talk, but please do interrupt if there's something unclear. I know sometimes English can be hard, and also some words, so really no problem whatsoever to start and explain in Dutch. I have a Flemish variant of Dutch, so maybe that's already an extra asset. So, first, this one. Around 1600, an extraordinary ornament developed, characterized by forms recalling skin and lobes, animal and human ears, mouths and genitalia, organs and bones, as well as dripping syrups and splashing water. The world these forms create is populated by a range of fauna and flora, faces and masks and monstrosities. Two brothers, Paulus and Adam Vanviana, both belonging to the most successful and innovative artists of their age, developed this ornament in expensive and exclusive silverware. The former, that's Paulus van Vianen, worked at the court of Prague for Emperor Rudolf II. The latter worked in Utrecht with wealthy merchants as clients. The awesome forms could initially be admired in their precious ewers, basins, dishes, bowls, and cups, but soon also turn up in other works of art by other artists, such as Johannes Lutma, as well as in a rich diversity of objects in metals and stone, wood, prints and paintings, and also here in this beautiful gilded leatherwork. The ornament was linked to the Dutch Republic, but not restricted to it, being popular in England, the German territories, and this is an example from Scandinavia. From the late 19th century onwards, art historians started to study this ornament. The Germans called it Ohrmuchse, and that was translated in English as the auricular, and that what is the form of an ear. In the Netherlands, Dutch, we call it kwab, and kwab stands for a fold in your skin, a thickening. However, these names point uniquely at the formal aspects, and therefore left many aspects of the ornament underexposed. And then something happened, a famous exhibition in the Rijksmuseum in 2018, called Kwab, by Reinier Baarsen. And that exhibition pointed at how the ornament was a means par excellence to express the owner's wealth and the artist's virtuosity. So all of a sudden, not so much the formal characteristics, but also the impact got attention in the studies of the kwab. Other studies, later, after the Rijksmuseum exhibition, made a connection to the prima materia. And the prima materia is the central material of alchemy, which the silversmiths evoked, with suggesting syrupy substances out of which all kinds of life appears. For them, the prima materia is the the basis of everything. Everything exists out of the prima materia. And if we look at some examples, you will see that they are negotiating with that idea. Another way of dealing with it is anatomy. Dissected skin is represented. You will see some examples which make that clear. But I, today, do not want to go too much into alchemy, to not go too much into the virtuosity of the artist, etc. I want to focus at humor and how far those very, very expensive silverware, far more expensive than, say, a painting by Rembrandt, how that worked and why was it humorous? Such expensive things. Let's start with this one. And no. This one I already had to show, but this one. And here you already see the skin represented, but also the monstrosities and that strange thing. So the dragon disappears in something that indeed looks like an ear, but also the thickening of skin, etc. This is the title page of a series of cartouches by Johannes Lutma, and his son Jacob published it in 1645. The Latin name, you can see it, is Festivitatis Aurifabris. The ornament is does not so much defined as the formal aspects, which did the 19th century art historians, but they pointed at that these series of prints offered the goldsmiths something to create pleasantry, because festivitatis means that what is gay, that what is witty. Lutma's publication also has a Dutch title. You can see it over there, under the festivitatis, de verscheidene snakerijen. Snakerij is a light-hearted and playful joke. Making this kind of jokes is gendered. It only belonged to the male artist. It's a boy, it's a male prankster who does the mocking. And it's used, and I quote from the real world, to express that one finds him bizarre or exceptional. So it's something bizarre, it's something funny, it's something exceptional. That's the play where those very expensive silverware is dealing with. The work by the hand of the Vanviana brothers, or Lutma, was worth far more than its melting value. That was exceptional and gives a first indication that witticism is also related to the big money. Moreover, snakerij, another synonym used to define snakerij is geestigheid. And geestigheid in Dutch is multi-layered. On the one hand, it's funny, but it's also clever. You're geestig, you're clever, but you're funny. And that combination, that is central to understand. That's very particular kind of silverware. Going back to art historians, 17th century art historians, in 1675, Joachim von Sandrart wrote his Deutsche Akademie, and he Germanized the word Schnakerei to name only one very particular work of art, namely this one. This is the famous, maybe the most famous creation in kwab, made by Adam van Vianen in memory of his deceased brother, Paulus, and ordered by the Amsterdam silversmiths, which is very exceptional because he was from Utrecht, and they do not hire one of their own silversmiths in Amsterdam. Normally they were so protective, but they do invite a silversmith from a totally other region, from a totally other city, and they ask him to make something in memory of his brother, who was related to the Prague court. So it was normally such a protective situation, the guiles, but this opened up the world. So the whole context of the making of this ewer is as exceptional as the ewer itself. And Sandrart admires this ewer, and he emphasized that the silversmith made it in one piece of silver. So this is only one piece of silver, you see, and of course the lid, that's another piece of silver, which is technically almost impossible to do, a miracle, as it were. That's what Sandrart says. And what he also says, on the one hand, he's really relating, this is so hard, technically almost impossible to make, and what he also says is, this is also a pleasant joke. He calls it snakerij. And how to relate those two, that's a bit the question today. The lidded ewer must therefore have had a layered impact on its contemporaries, in which the silversmith's skill and wit is connected to each other. A look at one particular figure of the ewer can illustrate how it similarly was meant to raise laughter. This was the little creature at the stem, so that what supports the vessel's cup. And it is what we could say maybe the form of an ape, an animal that was closely connected to humor in the early modern period. But if we closely look at it, we see that it's not really only an ape, it's also a satyr, it's also a cow, it's also a fox, it's a person with a stunt growth or with a hump. So the more you turn it, the more you see in it. And that's exactly the joke, of course, for the makers. Yes. Yeah. I printed this on 2 sides, and it's always a bit looking how far I am now. But this is the page I need to use. If we want to understand how that silverwork worked, we have to go to the Wunderkammern, the cabinets of curiosity, which were as popular in courtly society. Every nobleman, king, emperor who respected himself had this kind of Wunderkammer, as well as the burghers. The citizens had the merchants and even artists. Rembrandt had also his own Wunderkammer. Huge sums were spent on bringing together naturalia and artificialia that evoked a world defined by exclusivity. The silverware was joined by monstrous animals, dried or stuffed, exotic shells in exquisite mounts, antique gems, contemporary statuettes, and marvelous machines. There was no lack of humor in these cabinets. Rembrandt, I just mentioned him, for example, who owned an exquisite set of objects, but also relied on copies. So on one hand, he had those very original stuff in his Wunderkammer, but also if he got something from plaster, he also wanted to have it. So that kind of originality is only a bit, it's not that important for him. What he brought back together, for example, were Paulus van Vianen and Adams van Vianen snakkerijen in plaster, so not in silver, he could not afford it, it was far too expensive. And together he had a little statuette of this one in Brussels. So this is of course the Brussels one, he had a smaller one, what we call the Mannekepis, by Jérôme Duquesnoy. So the famous boy urinating. That could fall back on a century-old tradition of snaken, so those jokes of boys in sculpture. This could also be found in Wunderkammer. It originally can be found in Italy, the Wunderkammer of the Quattrocento, Cinquecento, and this is a typical Dutch example. Attributed to Arend van Bolten or a follower, that kind of strange, monstrous creatures that has to evoke laughter. But in the Wunderkammer, there were also things like this. A Schertsbeker, a fantasy cup, in the form of a ship, a building, fruit and vegetables, animal, humans, but this one is a very common one, a very popular one, in the forms of a windmill. These exquisite objects, they were also very, very expensive, did not stay untouched in the cabinets. They were really used in drinking parties. The cups were meant to elicit play. They can only be put on the table when empty. You can see it, so first you have to empty the cup. By strongly blowing on the pipe, that's hidden, let me see if I can, yes, here, this pipe. So by strongly blowing at that pipe, the sails start turning, and then the dial points at a certain number, and that is the amount of glasses you have to drink when you not finish it in time, when the wings stop turning. So that kind of games, it's super exquisite, it's super well made, it's very skillfully made, but on the one hand, it's also that luxury that is used in, kind of an ordinary drinking party. And it's that double system. We are a bit, not so familiar with it. It was central to the emphasis of the Netherlands, but even further. Of course, the creations of Vanviana or Lutma cannot straightforwardly be connected with this kind of table games, but we need to consider the context of festivities to come to a further understanding of the humor in this oracular ornament. Looking back at the word snaak, moreover, we can add that this word was often considered a synonym of nar. If we see the word snaak used, we often have the same kind of meaning than nar. So the jester in English, who performed for the nobility as well as the citizens during drinking parties. By the start of the 17th century, the actual performances of jesters had decreased in importance. The House of Orange, for example, did not keep a jester in their retinue, but the tradition lived on in the visual arts. They became even more popular. When they disappeared in the courts and in the cities, they became far more popular in paintings, prints, and drawings. So it's a typical knot we see here with the bells and with the bright colors. Moreover, artwork himself could take over the role of the jester to bring laughter to merry companies. At the time of Paulus Vanviana, at the very same Prague court, was the famous painter Giuseppe Archimboldo active. Yes, there he is. And that's also that kind of joke. Here he makes a portrait of Rudolf II, so the big emperor, as a set of vegetables. And he calls him Vertumus, the god. Just as the jester enjoying a certain freedom, fooling around with the ruler in the medieval courts and the late medieval courts, this is an artist who can fool around within, of course, limits with his patron, with the Emperor Rudolf II. And he calls his portraits grilli, and actually grilli is more or less the same word than snakerij in Dutch. It's also that kind of joke together with something intellectual, some wit, some cleverness connected to it. Yet the humor of the auricular ornament came to full development not at the Prague court, but in the Dutch cities. It's far more clear indications of humor in the kwab when we go to the Netherlands, to the citizens, to the cities. The imperial silverware that Paulus Vanviana made did less engage in laughter than his brother Adam working in Utrecht. We can take a newer of 1619, now in the Metropolitan Museum of Amsterdam, of New York, as an example. There is that seriousness. Here the story of Marcus Curtius is told, that the one who is very heroic and answers the god's demand to offer his life by throwing himself in a pit, so something very heroic, very classical, very exemplary. But in order to visualize this, he frames it in a very, very unique way, Adam Vanviana. A prominent cartouche encloses the central scene with, at the top, a unique, an antique volute, but then a very strange one, a very lively one, something that seems to move. And at the bottom, we see this kind of little creature, mirroring himself or herself or itself in the foot of the ewer. At both sides of the cartouche, so this is one side, but if you turn it, you see the same at the other side. At both sides of the cartouche, another face emerges from beneath a curtain, defined by a large nose, battered teeth, wild hair, a hazy look, and a grimace expressing unrestrained laughter. Underneath, we see a shark-like creature that tugs at a cloth with its sharp teeth, suffocating a two-faced, because on the other side there's also the face, a two-faced old man who is wrapped in a cloth like a newborn. His baby bottom is followed with a split fishtail. So something very, very strange to really define what are we seeing here. If we want to use, as art historians are so addicted to, if we want to use classical iconography, A stands for B, we get nowhere here. No explanation with our iconography. The old man exhales a strange substance. He seems to be flattened so strongly that he has to throw up. The lid of the ewer is formed by a fish whose lower jaw forms a headgear of a bearded man dominating the neck of the ewer. This headgear resembles the typical cap of a jester, a nar, So here, this with the bell, but then the bell is not a bell, but an eggplant. So everything changes the whole time. Everything is redefined. Everything transforms the more you look at it. But what does this resemble? Let's ask this question. If we see this bearded man here in a ewer, no one? My grandfather would have known. It resembles a very, very popular kind of jug. It's the baardman cup, so the bearded man cup, which is most of the time made in the region of Cologne, but it was super popular in the whole of Europe, and they found many, many examples even outside Europe, all the regions they colonized. So it was really everywhere to be found, very, very popular and not that expensive. It was used for alcohol, often in pubs, just to serve alcohol. Starting from that baardman, we see that the impact of alcohol turns out to be the central theme in the ewer, as the drunk world of inns and taverns is presented. Let's go back to this guy. The blurred face on the foot of the ewer can be interpreted as a play to evoke being drunk and not seeing clearly any longer. The heavy curls of the cartouche can enforce this effect, the drunkenness, what do I see? Further, Adam shows the consequences of drunkenness with the other faces on the ewer. Drinkers can lose themselves and fall into bad manners. Showing your teeth is a very bad manner in the 17th century. And that kind of unrestrained laughter of course, the vomiting of the baby-like old man. But is the silverware actually making fun of the consequences of alcohol? So he prominently, Adam Vanvianen, prominently displays his own name and the year he made this ewer, which is very exceptional that the silversmith presents himself so obviously as the maker. Normally a very small sign is used to indicate who made it and when. Here it's really obviously there, very, very prominently. Yes, those viewers who were informed on Adam's life could have linked the tipsy faces to their creator, as our silversmith, Adam van Vianen, also earned his living as a brewer. The ewer emphasized as a vessel meant to serve alcohol, its ornament pointing at the consequences of using alcohol and its maker are very closely connected. So the theme of the ewer, the function of the ewer, and the maker of the ewer are actually very closely connected here. To clarify this kind of connection, how a painting or a painter, a silversmith, and his work relate to and are proud of being in that situation, in that context of drunkenness, we need to go further. And let's go and look at, for example, the art historians and later look at some paintings. Karel van Mander, beginning of the 16th century, 17th century, till Arnold van Houbraken, the end of the 17th century, all of those art historians emphasize that painters, so now we're looking at painters, can only make audiences laugh if they manage to show themselves geestig. Once again, in the sense of funny, skilled, and clever. So that word also turns up of the ideal painter, the painter of humor. With their wittiness, painters can evoke comic scenes in such a way that they bring surprise to the standard repertoire of comic subjects and stereotypes. The drinking parties of unrefined peasants and vulgar city citizens belonged to the most popular subjects of paintings in this period. And therefore we have to go back to Pieter Bruegel the Elder, who Van Mander calls zeer geestig, and he calls him Pieter de Drol, Piet de Drol, something like that, again to point at, although he is a very big artist, he's also that kind of vulgarity. So that combination is not a problem for Van Mander, and as it's not a problem for our silversmith. He tells, Van Mander tells, that Bruegel went to the village fairs dressed up as a local to freely observe the peasants in the way they eat, drink, dance, jump, etc., etc. Similarly, Houbraken mentions Jan Steen, and I quote from Houbraken, "A cheerful mind can always devise something unusual, which can be applied to Jan Steen, who, always cheerful, was able to express with the brush and his wit things that deserve admiration because of their natural portrayal and manner of painting. So being humorous is also being a very, very, very good artist. That's what they say, which is for us a bit strange to completely understand. Let's look here at the famous peasant dance by Bruegel. And there we see that jester, a bit the same as we saw previously. And he tries to make a grumpy old man dance. And what interests me here is also this one, where we also see those consequences of drunkenness. A bit similar to the way that Adam Vanviana expressed the consequences of drunkenness. Maybe it's not that grasp, but it's also those open mouth. He can no longer control himself. He almost hits his companion next to him and things like that. So also there, people try to evoke the effects of drunkenness, and he is really very popular. Bruegel, he's followed in the whole 17th century. For example, here, with Andries Bot, where we also see those consequences of drunkenness clearly expressed. And what interests us is that it's also connected to the smoker, a very popular type as well in that pub to represent. Here we see in a painting by Jos van Kraasbeek also the smoker, but then a real focus on the smoker. And maybe if we look at this popularity of the smoker in painting in the period of, or a bit later, in the period of Vanviana, we see that the smoker can maybe also help us to better understand that small baby-like old man figure who's maybe not vomiting, but smoking. So it's all open to interpretation. You can give it a layered meaning, and you can interpret it in different ways. The personal involvement of the artist in the drunken scenes reaches a peak with Jan Steen. In a painting now at the National Gallery in London, for example, the master shows how the landlady is harassed by a drunken man who howls with laughter. So here the drunken man, and he harasses the lady of the pub. This humor is, of course, far from what we today call humor, right? Harassment is not something we laugh with. Moreover, for modern viewers, it must be surprising to realize that the drunken man has the outer appearance, so this guy, has the outer appearance of Jan Steen himself. Thus, the painter puts himself in the center of all the revelry. The painter often presents himself in this way as a comic haute actor. So we don't think, of course, that this directly relates to reality, but that it far more relates to comic theater in that period. And he, as it were, becomes an actor playing the role of the one in the pub who is making fun with the lady in the pub. So, where we are told about Bruegel that he went disguised to fairs so that he could paint the tipsy villagers convincingly, and where Adam Vanviana places proudly his name on the ewer in the middle of all avocations of drunkenness, Steen goes the farthest by staging himself in a comic play where alcohol and inns plays a prominent role. In his humor, here this one, in Dutch culture of the Golden Age, Rudolf Dekker studied how the personal involvement in humor can also be found in the writings of Dutch burghers, especially in the collections of jokes they wrote introducing themselves as stock characters. So also in literature we find a similar kind of things about the one writing, the humor depicted, and he's part of that humor. He's directly involved. Dekker made clear that such public self-mockery often fell back on the fact that humor in the Republic was polyinterpretable, so many layers of meaning, thus giving rise to an exploration of boundaries and taboos. Humor was not subversive or confirmatory, but subversive and confirmatory. Fixed values, while changed, are not completely wiped off the map. So it's not humor that all sets aside, but is negotiating the social rules time and again. So humor could be wry. The medieval farces with maliciously laughing devils threatening human salvation lived on in the Calvinist sermons, condemning laughter, no longer accentuating it as pernicious to one's fellow men. So the complex role of humor was compounded by the fact that medical theories regarded laughter as healing. Humor in the Republic was thus self-reflective and self-affirming, but paradoxically seen as crossing class lines, and on the one and the same time vulgar and refined, threatening and beneficial. Maybe I need to explain that a bit more in Dutch. So wat we eigenlijk hier zien is dat dus humor aan de ene kant het doel had om bepaalde dingen te confirmeren, vast te leggen, bepaalde sociale gebruiken. Aan de andere kant, terwijl het eigenlijk vastlegt, krijg je ook een bevraging van die regels, omdat natuurlijk het medium met humor bedekt wordt. Terwijl krijgen we ook nog het idee dat het iets goed is, humor, in die zin dat het ook nog iets medisch geneeskracht kan hebben, een geneeskrachtig effect op de humoren kan hebben. En de andere laag nog, de laatste laag die Rudolf Dekker bespreekt, is dan ook nog eens de laag van het duivelse, waar het duivelse meer en meer naar de humor getrokken wordt en niet meer louter het vrede, het onaangename, het slechte is, maar het grappige wordt om het weg te lachen, namelijk die oude katholieke traditie van het denken in duivels. Okay, this complexity finds fertile ground in Adam Vanviana's snakerijen. The exquisite objects were only available to the happy few and gave their owners tangible confirmation of their economic and cultural capital. However, the presentation of unsettling fluidity, as well as the constant transformations, I just called them, everything is changing the whole time, in the 1619 ewer with fish that transforms into a fool's cap, with an old man that transforms into a baby, with vomit that transforms into smoke, etc., framed and at the same time overshadowed the presentation of an ancient myth, so the Curtius story told, so the very serious story told. On top of that, Adam also presents a reflection on its own medium. The most expensive and exclusive silverware makes a prominent reference to a very common jug you can find in every pub. So all that kind of place, you're always played with, you're always having all those layers. The more you look at it, the more layers you will find. And that's exactly where fun, pleasantry is combined with cleverness and then also very refined technique. The 1619 ewer, so this one, was not unique or isolated. Adam's son, for example, Christian, who brought the ornament to the English court of Charles I, before he went and crossed the channel, he made this one, where we see very prominently two jesters, and they really stand out. Christian has their prototypical caps almost organically connected to the folds of the auricular ornament. By highlighting their broad grin, the silversmith goes beyond the conventional way in which gestures were depicted. Their wide, open mouths express uncontrolled, exuberant laughter. Once again, that what is very vulgar in this period. And they have a very prominent nose, which is also something to ridicule. The clear visibility of the teeth, the protruding tongue, all evoke vulgarity. Moreover, the reaction of the dogs, and the dogs just in top, I hope everyone sees the dog. Cool. The dog, where am I? The reaction to the dogs, of the gestures to the dogs, is also surprising. On the one hand, they really threaten those dogs, but on the other hand, there is no fear expressed by the gestures. The animals and humans seem to be engaged in a teasing game, indicating human dominance. This, however, contrasts with the lack of self-control emphasized in the facial expressions of the jesters. They also look a bit like animals. Since most of the actual silverwork has been lost, let's say at the end of the 17th century, it's totally out of fashion, so people remelted in order to make new, more fashionable items. So that's the remelting of silver. So we don't have that many silverwork left. So if we want to further consider, we have to look at prints and drawings of those pieces, such as the Verscheidene Snakerijen, which I just mentioned. That's the series by Lutma. And that was a response of the kunstige modellen. And that's what Christian made to commemorate his father, Adam van Vianen. So both the Vianes and the Lutmas try to claim the ornament with prints. So it's really, we own this ornament, we are excelling in it, so making a series of prints of what they did to spread it, because not everyone, of course almost no one, could own such a silverwork. So the prints really made you the owner, the inventor, the very excellent artist. So those are the konstige modellen. And they present, among other objects, a remarkable ewer that gives us further view on the snakkerijen. There, the figures dominate the whole design to such an extent that the original function of the object is neglected. As a sprout, waar je kan gieten, is not there. And the handle isn't there either, or very hard to handle, that handle. The belly is formed by a troni, so a face, very popular in painting, a troni, an explicit face with a huge nose, open mouth, wide open, and protruding tongue standing out. However, on closer inspection, the troni, so if you look at the nose of the troni, that's what I want to do. So on close inspection, the troni is more than merely a prototypical face. The nude female torso, which we see there, echoes in the nose. Do you see that? How that nude on top echoes in the nose, where we also see the legs and that bag entering. And it also has the same form, and it has the same position. Everyone sees that? Okay. Yes. Besides prints, we also look at drawings to get a further understanding of how kwab can be funny, what kind of humor kwab presents. This is from the Albertina. It's a drawing by Adam Vanviana, and on the one hand, it resembles the nudes of Goltzius, Cornelis van Haarlem, even Raphael, and then later onwards Rembrandt, of course, that kind of real nudes, as it were, not the idealized nudes. On the other hand, we see the position, the way the nude sits, as something classical. So it's the classical versus the real, that kind of negotiation we already see. But if we look at the face, it's getting very theatrical. At that very moment when this kind of drawings was made, the Commedia dell'arte became more and more popular in the Netherlands, and we see that kind of masks, which you now find most of the time in Venice at the souvenir shops. They originally belonged, of course, to the Commedia dell'arte, and that kind of faces is, of course, also directly related to the humor of Arlecchino, of Pulcinella, and that kind of figures. So the theatricality and then that nude figure is a very strange combination. Again, food for thought, as it were. Kwab plays with that Greco-Roman heritage of the nude and confronted it with strangeness and theatricality, with vulgarity and bestiality. However, not only did our snakkerijen welcome the myth, the Curtius myth, for example, or the ideals bodies of antiquity. They challenged that clearly, certainly in this drawing. What's also taken from the antiquity are the grotesques. The grotte of especially the Domus Aurea, they're called grotte, the grotesques, because they found it in the Domus Aurea, and the Domus Aurea was the palace of Nero, but was then, when they in the Renaissance discovered it, totally. There was a hill more or less made above it. So it's a grotte because they went from the roof to see the palace. That's why they call it a grotte. And there they saw kind of amazing, very funny, very monstrous creatures. And they tried to use it for their own decorations. In, for example, this is a very famous one, Giovanni da Udine, in the Loggetta, in the Vatican, very early onwards. So this is 100 years before the kwab. But that kind of creatures, very strange combinations of figures, very hard to fully understand how it functions, that combination. That kind of enigma is also there in the kwab, and it became very, very popular. And it's even so popular, that grotesque, that people start to call kwab, or to relate kwab, to snakkerij. They call it snakkerij, that's of course what I started with, but they also call it grotesque. So they refer to this kind of grotesques in order to understand it in the 17th century. This is a very famous book on the grotesque, more or less made in the period that kwab was very popular. We do see the kwab ornament here and the tiles of the roof. We do also see here kwab, all kinds of kwab, certainly here we see the kwab, and we see grotesques. But all of a sudden, and that must have really be surprising for the viewers, the grotesques come to life. They become like automata, like all kinds of ingenious techniques, playful things that we could find in the Wunderkammer. So all comes back, all comes together, as it were, in this a book by Jamnitzer, the new book of grotesques. It's just a set of all kinds of examples of how grotesques can be created, how you can draw, print, or paint a grotesque. And this is one of the title pages. There are more than one title page, where, just to repeat, snakkerij and grotesque are connected to each other, but also that typical kwab style, here and here, for example, is connected to this kind of very strange creatures, as it were, who fly, who live, who can be bought, and who can be played with. So the play here is very, very central.
Stijn, when you say here and here,
yeah, sorry, I forgot again.
Really understand where.
Yeah, so the tiles you see, so the tiles are typically kwab. They even look very the tiles of the stall, and the other one is if you have the cartouche and you look at what is pending there. It's also typical kwab style. What we see here is, of course, people playing in a basin, a water basin, with grotesque creatures who all of a sudden come to life, which is very playful, and or try to fly with it, or try to buy it at a market store. So that's a bit what we see. I think everyone can see that. But I did forget again that the mouse is not not visible for you. Sorry. A very final aspect I want to address of that very rich, layered way of how humor works in this kind of context is the laughter that is grim, ori, a bit threatening, a bit scary. So it's laughable, yes, but it's also scary. It's like a ghost coming, that play with ghosts and things like that. Their strangeness might have been amusing at first sight, but they are surely also capable of inducing an unease of the indeterminate. It is hard, if not impossible, to fully understand what we are exactly seeing. At the same time, certain figures are behaving hostile. Some are explicitly cruel to the point of being murderous, while others threaten us by looking us straight in the eyes. In this way, the fantastical nature of these figures shades into monstrosities. They are also monsters. The game played by the grotesque, as well as by kwab, is a sword that cuts both ways. The alienating forms that must have come across as natural and artificial at the same time may also have been a cause of some consternation. The wry smile of the shark-like figure, this one here, the shark-like figure crushing the old baby adds an element of dismay in the 1619 ewer. And then we can go back to this kind of creatures, who are hell in the one hand, so the boss creatures, who are on the one hand evoking hell. Are they funny or not? And that's interesting because right at this moment, Karel van Mander, the famous art historian, writes, there's a difference between the monsters of Bos and the monsters of Bruegel. Although they look the same, these are evoking hell, whereas Bruegel is not only evoking hell, he's also evoking laughter. So from the 16th century onwards, monsters are, of course, still having that scare, still evoking something that's scary, but on the other hand, they're also getting towards laughter, but they still have that scariness. So it's that combination of, on the one hand, being scary, still having that old tradition of devils, demons, etc. On the other hand, more or less, becoming more and more related to humor. And that's the difference, Van Mander says, between Bruegel and Bos. Conclusion. Earlier research showed that, oh, maybe I want to show, oh yeah, let's end with this one, huh? This is so beautiful. Conclusion. Earlier research showed that we can relate the agency of kwab silverware to the exceptional skill of the artist and the owner's extreme wealth and progressive taste. Further, the ornament was linked to interests in alchemy and anatomy. However, the organic forms populated by bizarre creatures remains difficult to understand. A next step toward a better understanding can be taken if we start from the original name of the ornament. The name snakerij points to the humorous impact of the exquisite objects. The jokes the silversmiths made were defined as light-hearted and playful. The snaken. Visual analyses pointed more specifically to jokes about the vulgarity of inns and comic theatre, as well as the laughing of bestiality and monstrosity. The question arises, however, how all this witticism can be linked to the exquisite and fashionable aspect of the silverware. The elitist nature of the objects will no doubt have elicited smiles for the happy few who could own such objects. However, soon the silverware was to be found in, among others, plasters, which Rembrandt owns, prints, which we just saw, so a wider audience could laugh along with the very rich and enjoy the silversmith's pranks. Like the gesture of yore, our snaken presented mischievousness with their silverware that whimsically probed the boundaries of humor in the face of being well-mannered, hardworking and devout. The preciousness of all this creativity, then, not only lied in the hours of craftsmanship and the weight of the silver, but also involved cultural capital, in which a mocking reflectivity determined its value. Thank you very much for your attention.
Can we conclude then that at the end of the 17th century, beginning of 18th century, this humor and lovable, or the love for the grotesque disappeared from art? And is that a cultural thing? Is it a religious thing? What happened?
There's of course always that will to go very close to antiquity, to the ideals of the Greek statues, for example, where there's the canon, the beautiful relation of how a body must represent it, the real question for realism, etc. And always that antipode, that what is total fantasy, that is monstrous, that is marginal. And we also see it actually then back in Rococo, where we also see that kind of fantasy coming back. So I think it's in waves that makes it more or less fashionable. If we really have to understand how or why, I do think then that we really, it's very hard. Many people tried to relate a concrete style, a very precise style, to a certain political context, for example, a religious context, but it's very hard to do so. It's very hard to explain why all of a sudden one style was very popular and another one not. So it's very hard to assess that. I do believe that we have to think in waves where the classical is far more dominant in certain periods and then becomes far less fashionable, and then fantasy rises.
And you said there's not much to be found about how people experience these things, but is there anything to be found about humor and jokes in this age?
Yes, of course.
Are the jokes described as this is a good joke or a bad joke?
Absolutely. So that's exactly what Rudolf Decker did. So this book, he really tried to look at how, there it was. Next one, yes. He really tried to look in literature then how humor functioned, so that layered way of functioning. So it is described, and what is funny for us is very often not funny for them, and vice versa. For example, the harassment of that lady in the pub, for us it's like, oh, you cannot laugh with that one. It was very, very funny in the 17th century. So it's also very strange how we have a totally different way of looking what humor is. That's why it takes so long to really understand how humor works. That's why I really need an hour to understand how layered humor was in the 17th century. For them, it was totally normal.
And layered in the Netherlands, Dutch, is it typical Dutch? Is it also hard to conclude?
Let's say that kind of relation between the very, very expensive, the very, very exclusive, and the very, very, what I call avant-garde, is rather unique. Yes, for example, in the Court of Rudolf II, we have things or products like Archimboldo, but I think that this is extremely rich in its layered meaning. Saying that this is typically Dutch and trying to explain why it really worked in the cities of the Netherlands and not so much in the court of for example, Rudolf II, although he had the chance to develop it, he had the means, he had the people doing it. It's very hard to explain. I do myself think that that it also has to do something with what we call in French the nouveau riche. So they do not have to reckon so much the old traditions as they did in court, and could really go towards that avant-garde in order to present themselves as not being courtly, but as wealthy as the emperor, to say it like that. So I do think that that's a way to explain it, but yeah, there's no hard proof on that.
Unfortunately, it's very rare, like many of the silverware was there, but has been used in other products now.
Yes.
So we cannot buy it tomorrow at the TEFAF, if you thought of that. Maybe.
I'm not sure if
it's not
anyone
there,
can afford
or
it.
maybe when you're very, very rich.
Yes. Who's
any
rich?
questions? Any other questions around this age? Because this is expertise, not just silverware, of course.
Thank you for your speech. I can imagine that etiquette is a focus to learn the norms and values of those times. And Norbert Elias, you know that?
Yes, of course.
He made a study of how to be ashamed of differed and developed all the times.
Yeah.
And it became more and more private in times. So what is laughable is also a bit along norms and values.
Yes, so indeed the classical definition in the process of civilization by Elias is of course that gradually we get more and more reserved, we get more and more towards our manners, pointed to our manners, really trying to show as less what we really feel or to express it too, and indeed here we do have a too strong expression, and so it can be of course placed in that process of civilization which Elias discusses by making it laughable. Laughable is one of the biggest things of course to do. If you want to have good manners, you laugh with the bad manners and you try to show yourself as the one who has the good manners by laughing at the bad manners. That's exactly what Elias describes, and I do think that that is certainly one of the products you can place in that civilization process, as Norbert Elias calls it.
And the other one is brutalism, like Trump. It's the brutalism is a form of arrogance, and the wealthy people can be more arrogant, and the rich may be also easier.
That's something I really have to think about. I'm not so sure if that kind of brutalism, which unfortunately is there in our own time, is so celebrated in the time of Vanviana. In that way that it's certainly made laughable. It's part of a very exquisite game, that's for sure. But if it's truly celebrated, just as Trump does these days, I'm not so sure. I'm tending to say no because, obvious reasons. But I have to think about it. It's a good suggestion.
Could you say that it's some of this silverware or pictures, there's also something normative about it? Or is it like a comment on norms?
Yeah, so that's also what Rudolf Dekker says. So it is, on the one hand, defining those norms, and on the other hand, challenging the norms. And it's both. It can both be in the same thing. So that's also how the process of civilization by Elias is not a straight line. It's a bit back, forward. And it's only in the way of negotiating that it really works. If it's not negotiated, if it's just presented there by a Calvinist sermon, by a Calvinist minister, for example, it works differently. I think it works less rhetorically. It's when you laugh with it that rhetoric really starts, and persuasion really starts to work.
Yep. Coming your way.
Yeah, thank you. All these snakerijen only found in these types of objects, like these, is it ewer, or do you also find these in stucco above hearths or ceilings? Because
yeah, so I started my talk with this one, but there are many other. Back. So with that leatherware, it's taking its time. But it can be found also in wood, but it's less refined in wood. It's less elegant. You can find it in churches even, which is very surprising. So in the screens used between the altar and the ship, where the audience sits or where the worshippers sit. You can find it in stucco as well, for sure, absolutely. And you can find it in, yes, it's taking its time, in this kind of fantastic leatherware. So it's there indeed everywhere, but it started with the silverware. And obviously, I think Silverworks works the best because try to imagine, if you have such a ewer and there's a party going on, and of course there's no light like this, it's only candlelight, so it flickers. And people also wear, most of the time, goldware with golden threads in it, so that flickers too, so everything is giving light, and it's getting far more animated. And also this kind of leatherwork works in the same party, in the same kind of festivity. So I think you have to take it like that. And then that's why I less take wood into consideration, because I'm of course looking at a humor. I think that certainly in the context of the rich rooms, where it really works, so silver is that flickering light. Where it really works in wood, it loses kind of that imagination, that enigma, I think.
But is it also something like this ewer? Would you put it away for certain specific events? Or,
yeah.
If you have stucco, it's always present, and maybe a room has to be representative sometimes.
You could find it on cupboards. So there were cupboards which were open, so you could always look at it. It was really going from hand to hand if there was something of the guild going on. So then you shared that ewer and drank from it, or you could really use it. So normally it was in a cupboard, but at special festivities you could use this. We think that's also something we are not totally convinced of, but I think it must have worked like that, so that it was certainly there at the parties again. But you could see it always.
No paintings known of ewer like that.
Oh, it was the most popular one. That ewer was the one was the. How to explain? So that specific ewer. So the very popular one. So actually this one, you see here, was represented in many paintings, prints and drawings, and there are many plays with it. For example, in a famous painting, Pandora, who's a nude figure, has it in her hand as if it's the box of Pandora. But then the nude female figure on the handle has disappeared as if it's Pandora. So there are always, also in painting it's used, also in the framing of paintings it's used, and it's used very cleverly, as if the painter goes along with the play of the silversmith and reinterprets it, uses it in order to give that extra layer again. So for him, that nude figure is Pandora, she's brought to life and she holds the ewer. So there's always a play with it also in the other arts.
Yeah, thank you.
Did the church in any way react to this? Like forbidden things, keep it at home for your parties, but don't show it in public? Or
no, actually not. So they even integrated in their own. So one of the famous products of Johannes Lutma is it koorhek. So the how is it in English? So to separate the choir from the ship in the church, koorhek. Screen, yes, a church screen, absolutely, thank you. Which was full of that kind of creatures. So very strangely enough, they hated all kinds of theater. Huh? They hated everything that was in any way related to too much fantasy, which was of the devil. But this one, they even allowed in their own churches, and they paid big money for it. So that's a very strange one indeed.
And you talked about the Italian theater makers and the masks, and was that a tradition here in Dutch too? Were there
it only started
theater plays with jokes and stuff like that?
I did some work on masks, and of course there were masks before the Commedia dell'arte, but if you look at this drawing which I showed, it's really a Commedia dell'arte mask, because it's a half mask, only did with a protruding nose, which really clearly goes back or to Arlecchino or to Pulcinella, and quite in the same period, those groups of Commedia dell'arte actors came to the Netherlands, so it was directly involved. So I do think you can directly relate it to it, but of course masking, wearing a mask and things like that is clearly played in a more abstract, more general way in the kwab as well.
And the role of the nar or the fool?
Yeah, the
was
jester.
it in court or was it also on the street?
Both, both. So you had it in the streets, as we see, for example, in Breugel, but it was also at court. So you had the court jester, you had the peasant jester. We clearly see that, for example, in the Breugel painting.
Well, I thank you very much, Stijn Bussels, for coming to Maastricht for this special TEFAF lecture. And I hope to see you back. Next time, we're starting a lecture series in Dutch on art. Check out our website or our booklet. I thank you very much, and I hope to see you back. And again, thank you, Stijn Bussels.
Thank you. Thank you.